I guess this is Scott Jarman, the local chapter president of the Association of Energy Engineers for Austin and San Antonio. And this is our June lunch program, another virtual program. And I think we'll maintain this format for a while, given all the things going on with the COVID pandemic. Today, we are lucky enough to have Jonathan Thompson, or JT, the Vice President of Enterprise Accounts with Enbala Power Networks. But before I dig too deep into that, just I guess a quick announcement, our two announcements. One is our local chapter Vice President has resigned his position. He's having some health issues, and said he couldn't fulfill the role. That's Woody Thompson. So we have a vacancy for vice president of the local chapter. Another announcement, and I think I mentioned it last time, is that we're working to stand up a revised website. We have access to it now, and we're doing some kind of final configurations, and we should be sending out emails maybe in the next couple of weeks with information about that new website and how to access that. And then I guess the last thing is, in our next meeting in July, we will have Dub Taylor, formerly with the State Energy Office. He was the director, and he retired in January of this year. And he is now with the Texas PACE Authority. And he is going to be talking about commercial PACE financing for energy efficiency, water, and renewable upgrades in commercial properties. So I look forward to the July meeting when we'll discuss, how PACE can facilitate deeper energy and water retrofits in buildings. So for today, Jonathan is going to talk about distributed energy resources. It's something that's been very fast evolving, and it is something that the utilities, I think, frankly, struggle with, and exactly what kind of business model to bring these resources online through, and also the coordination of those resources to maximize the benefit on the utility grid. And this is a space that JT has been involved with for around 20 years, and he has a lot of experience with multiple companies, buying and selling energy. He has worked with General Electric, Genscape, ICAP, and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the area of distributed energy resources and how to integrate them into the grid operations. So I welcome JT to discuss DERs and how they can be beneficial to both customers and to the utility. Thank you.
Scott, thanks. I appreciate it. Linda, thank you for your help in getting set up this morning or this afternoon. So I appreciate everybody hopping on and being here. I like to kind of start off a little bit about, what kind of in my spare time, what spare time I get. I like to be very involved in my kids' school. And right before COVID hit here in Houston, they had a career day. And so I went in to kind of talk about actually distributed energy resources and about supply and demand and keeping everything in balance on the electric grid and why it's important. And it was funny because I showed pictures of like solar panels and wind turbines, and I would ask them questions like, do you know what this is? They'd raise their hand. That's a solar panel. Awesome. What is this? It's a wind. They'd either say a wind farm, or actually some kids would be like, that's a wind turbine. Like, that's fantastic. And, so I'd ask them questions. Does the wind always blow, or does the sun always shine? They're like, no. And would ask them questions about why electricity is important. And it's funny because these kids really, and these are K through 5, because I have 3 all in that grade range. And they knew exactly what these assets were. And more importantly, they were asking important questions. And, it never failed. I'd have a kid say, well, can't you just store this when the sun's shining? Can you not just store this energy? It's like, well, as a matter of fact, you can. And I bring that up because, the kids get it, right? They get that there are all these new resources out there, the solar panels and wind farms, and they understand there's batteries now, and they understand the need for electricity. But the problem is that, and I relay this to the kids in the meeting or in the career day, was that the complexity is only increasing because there's more and more of these assets coming onto our footprint. And that's creating a headache for the utilities. And I spend quite a bit of time, my territory is everything from the Rockies out east to the coast. And there's a lot of discussions that utilities are having around how do we harness these assets? Number one, how do we even deal with an interconnect request? That's usually the primary issue. But then after that, what can we do to either see them and or control them to make sure that my system stays reliable during the course of any given period of the day? So, over the course of our time together, I figure what we'll do is, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about, distributed energy resources and the grid itself, and what we're seeing and what's happening. How do you actually harness DERs and what types of value streams are out there for both utility and customer to take advantage of? And that will all be dependent upon state and wholesale market opportunities, et cetera. And then I really want to kind of spend the last bit of time really kind of just diving directly into some use cases where utilities are working, on, either very small programs that are harnessing the value for say one or two use cases up to more complex use cases. And I also plan on highlighting, a couple of use cases of the individual end customer, right? And the value that they can see when they participate in certain programs that are available to them in certain markets, right? And ERCOT is a little different beast for sure. And with, with Austin and San Antonio being the no IEs, that does add a little bit of complexity. But regardless, at the end of the day, the technology's there to allow utilities to connect and control and gain visibility to these resources in order to better keep the grid stable, but also provide programs and services that allow customers to, rake in some benefits for the investments that they may have made in these distributed energy resources. So over the course of the next, 40 minutes or so together, by all means, stop me, ask questions. If I don't have an answer, I'll definitely come back to you at some point. I'll send a note to Scott with an answer to it, but feel free to chime in along the way. So what we're seeing outside, in the world around us is that our grid's actually inverted, right? We've gone from a situation where we had the centralized power plants that were generating electricity and everything being distributed out to the load centers across the footprint. And that's now kind of flipped on its head to where most of the generation that we're seeing coming online is what we would call the grid edge, right? Behind the meter. And in some cases in front of the meter, right? But regardless, it's at the grid edge and not from a central station, if you will. And a lot of that is kind of changing the dynamic of kind of what's happening in this market, right? We, in kind of our normal way of viewing the world, right? It was a passive market. There were day ahead markets. We had rate payers and forecasts. It was a closed network. But with the emergence of distributed energy resources, right? And maybe I should take a step back to define what that is. Distributed energy resources, when we look at that, a lot of people immediately think solar storage, but it goes beyond just solar storage. It's EVs, it's loads, it's solar and storage, and wind. And so a lot of these, a lot of times people focus strictly on the kind of the new shiny, right? The solar panels and batteries. But what gets lost in the fray is that the loads that we've been trying to connect and control for years through, legacy DR programs and such, those are distributed energy resources too. And they can be used for the benefit of the grid and for the benefit of the customer in a more real-time setup, right? And that's kind of where we're moving to with the push into this, what, a lot of people have called kind of the grid 2.0. But, bottom line is you have now more transactive markets, more real-time markets. Everything's being housed in the cloud. You have more of a, what some would deem as a prosumer or an active consumer, consumers who are actually putting energy back onto the market and getting compensated for that in places. And better forecast, and you're moving from, more of a forecasting to actually predicting where, your output's going to be if you're in the solar side of things, or your output on loads, because we have more predictive analytics that are telling us exactly what consumers and businesses are actually using or going to use in a time horizon that varies from the next minute to the next day ahead, right? And that's constantly getting updated through learning algorithms. So this is what's happening to our system, right? This is what we're seeing in a lot of places. And what's driving that is really kind of three main drivers, right? First is decarbonization, and that is really, I think I just saw the other day with Amazon, waving their flag around, going to carbon free. I think, we had a couple of utilities even just this week, in the past week, say that they're going to be, zero carbon, emissions come 2050. Our partner utility in New Mexico, the public service companies in New Mexico, PNM, they're under a regulatory mandate to be carbon free by 2040. So a lot of, utilities and customers, because of their own, edict or flag that they want to wave, are moving into this decarbonizing their footprint. Then you have the digitalization of everything, right? And a good case in point is NYPA, the New York Power Authority, right? Which serves most of the state institutions in the state of New York through low-cost power, primarily hydro off the Erie. But so like state prisons, state universities, the New York transit system, a lot of these state-owned, government-owned buildings are all being, and even large industries in the state are given, cheaper power through NYPA, through their economic development program. But they have a goal that by 2040, I believe it is, they want to be completely digital from generation to consumption, right? End to end, a fully digital utility. And then you have the decentralization piece, which I'd highlighted earlier, where, for the last probably 4 quarters, you've seen more generation being set up at the grid edge than you have power plants being built, right? So you're seeing more houses with generation on it. You're seeing more businesses with generation on it, or even some front of the meter assets and kind of more of the PPA, if you will, out at the grid edge, being built at a far faster pace than utilities or even IPPs are building, combined cycle plants. Right. So these three trends are really driving this market. And it's one that, as Scott had highlighted, utilities are trying to figure out how to get their head around this, right? How do we capture the value and create programs and services that will benefit our customers, but more importantly, give us visibility and control into these assets so that we don't have brownouts, we don't have voltage excursions, we don't have issues on our system that will create reliability issues. Across the globe, we're seeing a lot of drivers here, right? Of course, on the left coast, there's definitely, a lot of push in California through, regulatory mandates that cause, renewable generation to be pretty much the only game in town. But with that has come the infamous duck curve that everyone's familiar with. But we're seeing it across the globe, right? We're seeing it in Europe, where this emergence of distributed energy resources is actually driving new markets, especially in Germany, where you're actually seeing markets that, we have here in ERCOT, like what we would deem as fast frequency response, or, just basically, just regular, what they call secondary reserve, what we would deem as frequency response, like you see in PJM under the Reg A program there. But these are new markets, and you've got trading entities and actual utilities who are now trying to figure out, how do we harness all these DERs in our footprint to participate in these new markets as they become available. And then you have places like Australia, which their market's very similar to ERCOT, right? Energy only market, no capacity, but their market cap there is $14,000 a megawatt hour versus our 9,000 here. And they hit that thing in a far more frequency than we do here. And I'll have an example of a use case down there where we're working with 1,000 homes that are set up with solar and storage on them to participate in these opportunities where the market hits a $14,000 megawatt hour price cap. And what's happening is that, if you move from left to right, this is kind of what's happening in our industry, right? And this is what distributed energy resources are doing for both the consumer and more importantly for the utility, right? It's going from these day ahead ops planning and kind of bulk power system type of use cases, if you will, right? I know what I need day ahead. I'm going to schedule that. I'm going to call an event because tomorrow between 3 and 7, I'm not going to have enough capacity and from a generation side. So I need to match that with, battery and or loads being taken offline and the typical DR type of thing to more, day of, and even in cases now, because the technology is there where you can take aggregations of batteries and loads, solar, and be able to participate in non-spend reserves, right? In that 10-minute dispatch. And even more importantly, now the technology's there in this field where now you're not solving for kind of the bulk power system need of like day ahead or even day of type of situations, and I like to kind of, equate it to now you're not doing surgery with a chainsaw, you're actually doing it with a scalpel. And you're actually going down to the feeder level and the substation level, and you're taking aggregation of residential and C&I customer resources that are distributed, of course, and being able to help balance the system at a very localized level. And not just for active power, but also for reactive power, right? Looking at voltage and the voltage bar optimization, VBO, right? And even taking on more of the traditional, what would be traditionally like the CDR type of use case, right? And so the resources are there. And now the technology's there for utilities to actually be able to, one, see them, because that's probably the most important thing in all the utilities that I've talked with is like, I just want to see where all these resources are on my footprint. And then the second phase of that is usually now that I see them, can I control them, right? And if I don't have an existing program in place that incentivizes, a customer to allow me to control it, do I create one? And what's the cost benefit analysis to allowing me to do that? So when you look at the grid edge, right, and you look at all these distributed energy resources that are out there, it's really important, and the utility space has really done a great job of starting to get up to speed with this, no pun intended. But there's 3 main kind of pillars that need to be kind of the core to how utilities take DERs and incorporate them into their, into their everyday operations. One is the speed, right? Because again, as I showed on that previous page, right, where we were looking at solving for problems on a day ahead type of time frame, when you start to incorporate distributed energy resources and looking at a very localized level, you need to be able to move in the speed of the distribution system, which is definitely, as we all know, not in a day ahead context. It has to be scalable, right? It's being able to connect and control hundreds of thousands of assets and within your footprint, because that's where the market's going. I mean, as I showed you with the trends earlier, that's where things are headed, right? I mean, look at our, Portland General Electric, I think 2 years ago was saying that every 8 minutes they have a solar system coming online on their system every 8 minutes. And that's crazy, right? And that's, we're seeing that elsewhere, right? Our friends in New Mexico are saying they have, a few hundred solar interconnect requests that are sitting in the queue right now that they're kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out how they're going to get them onto their system, and so you got to be able to handle the scalability that is going to take place, especially when we go toward and kind of talk about the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And lastly, it has to be accurate. right? Accurate from a standpoint of, one, your forecasting. We all know the stories with ERCOT and forecasting the variability of wind and solar and what happens when the forecast doesn't, match with the actual output. We have a little problem. But more importantly, outside of the forecasting piece of how these resources are going to be performing and more importantly available, it's the accuracy of understanding that if you asked that particular battery to discharge 5 kW, did you get 5 kW? Or did you just get 2.5? If you are expecting a solar system to output, 2 megawatts, are you getting the 2 megawatts or is it 1.75, right? Because that difference, that delta is important to us all at the grid, on the grid side of things, right? So the accuracy is key. And with that, what we're finding is that for utilities, it's creating new revenue streams, it's creating new customer programs, and for our friends in the distribution center, right, the control center, it's now giving them more tools in the toolkit to solve for problems that they're seeing now with the emergence of distributed energy resources on their system. So when you look at technology, right, there's a lot of different things that can be applied in this market, and people, and companies, and, whether they're competitors or partners of ours in this space, right, we're all trying to solve for the same problem, right? We're trying to be able to, deal with line loss, provide volt-var control, peak energy management at a very localized level for an end customer who maybe is trying to, within themselves, avoid a 4CP type of situation. Like here in ERCOT or in IESO, where they have something called a global adjustment, which is very similar to the 4CP here in ERCOT. Being able to capitalize on it and take it and trade, right? Take an aggregation of resources, both load and generation, and put it in at a put a value on that and stick it in SCED there in ERCOT and say, well, if the cap hits, if the price hits, $1,000 a megawatt hour, then I'm going to shed load and provide generation and and monopolize or monetize on that particular value. And that's where, software has become key in this space, and where we see a lot of this going in the future, not only from a, kind of a 50,000 foot level of the ADMSs and the distributed energy resource management systems of the world, but even in the way that like thermostats and batteries and the electric vehicle charging stations are being, monitored and controlled. All that's now being done in the cloud, right? And that's creating a lot of opportunity for utilities to now take advantage of this cloud-to-cloud connectivity to be able to see and control these resources to solve for grid problems and monetize off of that and provide some value to their end customers. So what we've seen, I can only speak for Enbala, right? But when you look at the buildings and the fleets of EVs, home automation, solar storage, as I mentioned before, the existing loads, and even just battery energy systems, right? Whether that's lithium ion or some other chemical makeup, right? You could really bucket it into kind of 3 different areas that utilities that we've worked with over the past 10 years have really kind of fallen into one of 3, if not all 3, over the course of time, right? But almost without exception, the first one is usually cost mitigation, right? They are trying, a great example I'll highlight later in a use case is our friends at Eversource, which is the utility that is the wires company. They do not generate, but they're the wires company for all of greater Boston, most of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. They're aggregating across C&I customers, residential customers, batteries, EVSEs, you name it, all to avoid what amounts to ISO New England demand type tariff charge for coincidental peak. They make up 55% of the coincidental peak within ISO New England. So any amount of load shift that they can take during a coincidental peak event is just savings for them, right? It's a cost mitigation opportunity. For others, it starts at cost mitigation and becomes revenue generation. Portland General Electric's a good example because now they're participating in the energy imbalance market that Cal ISO had created a few years back. And for others, it's risk reduction, right? It's just minimizing risk, line losses, non-wires alternatives, that provide them with an ability to manage the risk at a very local level. For us, and when you look at, really software in general, when you want to talk about dealing with controlling distributed energy resources and harnessing their value, right? For us, it means that you've got to be able to have flexible topology. And by that, I mean that aggregation of resources can be done at any of a multitude of levels, right? We have utilities that aggregate DERs, regardless if they're residential or C&I, at the substation level, because that's exactly what they want to look at. They want to look at substations, and granted, for them right now, it might be a swivel chair approach where they have their DMS screen on one side and our screen on the other, and they see a particular hotspot on the DMS, and they see what assets they can control at that particular substation, because again, that's how it's aggregated. And they then are able to, call an event or schedule an event that allows them to, take some relief off of that particular system, right? So having the topology, flexible enough to allow you to aggregate these resources in any of a number of ways. I'll highlight a little bit later when I talk a little bit about technology about, digital twins, right? And what does that mean? Creating a twin of every resource out there and how they act as a battery, because every resource, every distributed energy resource in our mind really behaves like a battery. They may not have power, but they have energy, or they have no energy but power. They all behave like a battery. A great example would be a thermal storage, if you will, at a cold storage warehouse, right? I mean, that in itself, it acts like a battery. You can drive the temperature up and down based on what you do with the compressors there, right? A lot of more technology being put out there around artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, right? That better understand that, Scott and I may both have the same HVAC system on our house. We have the same square footage, but we operate our thermostats differently. My wife likes to hang meat in the house pretty much because she keeps the thermostat at 68. Scott's wife probably doesn't, probably still like 73, 74. So, understanding that there is some differences in the way that our two houses operate that same asset, same model, same everything, that's things that you got to take into consideration, right? And the last piece I'll highlight here is like the reporting and analytics, right? Because what we have seen utilities starting to do is they know that DERs are coming, distributed energy resources are coming. They're starting to create programs for those resources, whether it's a smart thermostat program or a battery program or an EV charging program that pushes them or incentivizes them to charge off peak. When, of course, the power's more available, if you will. But it's the system planning teams within these respective utilities that are taking all this data that's being captured at the asset level, and all of that's going in and feeding into existing tools that they have around system planning and like where they may need to build out infrastructure and where, they need to look at potential non-wire solutions based on kind of what's taking place at a very localized level. So what I personally have seen in the distributed energy resource space, especially over the past probably 2 to 3 years, has been most of the programs and services and the folks in the room, if you will, when we're having conversations and we're planning and brainstorming, have been all like energy efficiency, demand side management folks. What I've seen in the past 2 years is now folks from the grid mod teams are sitting in those meetings, folks from the distribution control center are sitting in those meetings, and folks from the system planning teams are sitting in those meetings. And mind you, everybody has their own, kind of fiefdom and cross to bear and kind of what they're, interested in and what's important to them. But usually through the course of the brainstorming, kind of designing, kind of how everything gets set up, everybody's singing from the same sheet of music toward the end, right? Which is, there's resources available. We can see them, we can control them, we can create programs that incentivize customers, allow us to do that. And now we're collecting all this data that can help drive us to make more informed decisions going forward on how we keep our grid stable and how we build it out from an infrastructure standpoint going forward. Again, things can be dealt with at a very kind of bulk power system level, right? In this new grid that we're dealing with now because of distributed energy resources. But also what cannot be lost is the fact that distributed energy resources, right? Again, whether it's residential or C&I, it's battery, load, EV, you name it, it now allows us to now look at solving for problems at a very localized level, right? The question becomes, how do you incentivize a customer that will allow you to, connect and control at a very local level on, almost on any given day at any given time, right? There are battery programs up in the Northeast where they're incentivizing customers, residential customers. They're providing them with $250 a kW for battery storage as a rebate, as long as they're allowed, they being the utility, are allowed to actually connect and control that battery 60 times a year. And really, it amounts to basically every day during the summer, minus the 4th of July, every weekday. And so for $225 a kW a year, that's pretty decent incentive on a 5 kW battery system. That's roughly almost $1,000 a year in money rebate coming back to a customer, right? Now that's an outlier, mind you, as far as the value or the dollars and cents. I haven't seen anything higher than that. But again, these are the kind of the cost benefit, discussions that a lot of utilities are having right now, because again, DERs are coming, but the technology's there that'll give a utility the opportunity to see it and control it to solve for any of a number of use cases, right? And again, this is kind of a rehash of an earlier slide, right? Where, you're going from the old school, what our mom and dads would consider DR 1.0, right? To now, this isn't your dad's DR, right? It's real time. It's taking place in seconds. You can connect and control these assets. Even loads you can turn up and down versus just off, which has been the general context of what we've always used, DER such as loads to do, right? We just turn the damn things off, and we've opened up a little bit of breathing room from a capacity standpoint, right? But that's not the case anymore, right? It's turning the dial both ways, right? And all these resources provide utilities with the opportunity to do that. Just got to figure out kind of what program and what the incentive, what's the dollar and cent going to be, for that, right? I'll just quickly go through this. Again, the topology piece of it, right, makes sense from a standpoint of, right, that within a software space, when it comes to distributed energy resources, the flexibility has to be there to allow a particular battery to participate in any of a number of programs, so much as the market rules allow it, right? So yes, it participates in a typical DR, but it also could be participating in a peak demand management type of situation, be participating in a non-spend reserve. It could be participating in a voltage or a frequency type of program, right? So it's not a either or, it's all of the above / both, right? And it's just what incentive is most economic at a given time that allows you to call upon that resource, right? So the topology sense, I bring it up again just because one resource, one DER, does not have to be kind of pigeonholed into only participating or only being available for one program. That's not how they're designed. The market rules may be the one barrier to entry, but those are changing. I mean, hell, even in ERCOT, those are kind of going through a change process now with a couple of the NOPRs that are on the docket, right, from TAP. So that's important to kind of drive home that topology is key, that allows you, the utility, to be able to call upon a resource for any of a number of different reasons and programs, and not be kind of pigeonholed into, well, I can only call these thermostats with this type of program. That should not be the case, because again, the technology is there to allow you to do that, right? When we talk about digital twins, again, we talk about taking a distributed energy resource and modeling it like a battery, when it's available, when it's not, what constraints there may be, because in a lot of cases, when we look at batteries, a lot of batteries have a minimum state of charge that they have to have in them because that's just the way the program rules are set. And in the case in Australia where we're working, it's 20%. Every house has to have a state of charge of 20% in their battery at all times at a minimum because it's backup power, right? And so, understanding those constraints, working around those constraints, and then putting some machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms on top of that to better understand, again, how that homeowner or how that business is actually using that resource so we can better predict the availability of that resource on an hour ahead to day ahead type of situation is critical when you look at all of these different assets that are sitting in your footprint now and will be sitting in your footprint down the road. I'm just going to kind of highlight, this is a little bit of, we call it a transactive optimizer. At Enbala, it's a really kind of, how would I deem it, like a complex way of saying it's a bidding engine, right? That's really what it amounts to. It is really just understanding what assets are available, how much flexibility they have in a certain area or across the entire footprint, and what the cost would be to call upon those resources, and every second better understanding which ones you need to go and control and which ones you can't control, and constantly providing a feedback loop that understands that, all right, out of 100 assets, these 75 are available. These will take care of the grid need that I have at this given moment in time. And if I lose any of those assets in the midst because they've hit a constraint, like a 20% state of charge threshold, or a thermal threshold of a chiller being at or close to its thermal limit, then do I have other resources available that can be brought in to help maintain the stability of the system and solve for that grid need at that point in time, right? So this is all done kind of behind the curtain. We like to say a lot of times it's like when you're looking at a duck on the water, the duck just seems to be kind of just cruising along, no issues. But if you go underwater, his feet are going 90 to nothing, right? And that's kind of what this is doing kind of behind the curtain. Architecturally speaking, right, when utilities look at how they need to kind of manage all of these distributed energy resources, right, a lot of things come into play, right? Not only is it, can I connect to the Tesla system? Can I connect to the Sonnen system? Can I connect to ChargePoint? What about JuiceBox? Hey, I have this customer that has this type of building management system. I have a set of customers that have Nest thermostats and others have Ecobee. Like, there's all types of things out there, right? So being able to connect and control to each of those is important, especially at a cloud level, and having those integrated seamlessly through industry standard protocols or through APIs, if you will. But then you have to have the flexibility to have that same platform be able to integrate seamlessly with your legacy systems that you have, right? OMS, DMS, your GIS, your CSM in some cases, right? And feeding all this information into your customer service, management platform, right? Like a Salesforce. We have some that have all of this data that's being collected about these distributed energy resources and how they're behaving and how they respond to certain control signals, feeding that into systems like Pi so that they can build one-line diagrams of like what's going on a given feeder and understanding what the potential impact could be if they need to kind of switch which feeder serving, or which substation serving a given feeder, right? And so having the ability to have a software layer in there, I think is something that I think all of our utility partners are starting to understand, and understand that we need protocols in place that are industry standards, that are not esoteric or proprietary, that allows utilities to connect and control to any asset, regardless of the name on it and the type that it is, or whether it's a residential or CNI customer, right? And that's happening, right, through, IEC, their protocols there in Europe, OpenADR, DNP3, which has been around for, I think, ever since. I think that was the second thing after Moses did the 10 Commandments. He actually created DNP3. So it's been around a while. And then, of course, you got, the 2030.5s and IEEE with 1547. So, these are industry standards that we think, are there. They're there for a reason to allow utilities to now connect and control to these resources. And it's important that, these standard protocols continue to be maintained, and as new ones get developed, that, industry gets behind that and helps ensure that, what works at Austin Energy can work at CPS or at Eversource or at Alabama Power, right? Regardless of the systems that are in place, both legacy and new. That for us, that's why we've continued to build on an ecosystem of partners in this footprint, right? Everything from curtailment service providers and aggregators that, some of them are active here in ERCOT, to, program management, to CNI asset controls and inverters, and even into MDM, right? So that we can, help with the M&V piece of that on the back end to better match up like what actually happened in, after an event has taken place, whether that's at a bulk power system level or even at the local substation / feeder level, right? And it's important that these, we're all going to play in the same sandbox, I like to say. And so it's important as technology providers, us, our competitors, and the vendors in this space that provide hardware and or software, that, we all learned, as I tell my kids, right, you got to learn to play nice. And I still struggle with that with them, but, it's a work in progress. And so is the distributed energy resource space. All right, so I'm going to kind of this last little bit here, I want to kind of focus here in the last, 10, 12 minutes on the use cases. Because really that's what it's all about when you look at distributed energy resources. They provide such breadth of opportunity, both now and in the future, as far as future use cases that, quite frankly, have been conceptually designed, but not actually put, kind of shovel in the ground, if you will. But it's definitely been scoped out and thought about. But you have kind of this, kind of set point based fleet control, right? So this is kind of taking an aggregation of distributed energy resources, and you're driving it to a set point, right? Whether that's, frequency control, like, what we see when we get an AGC signal and you're following that AGC, kind of like, the dogs at the Greyhound Park following the rabbit, power flow management, renewable firming, right? Being able to balance out the intermittency that we see in renewable energy resources, both in front of the meter and behind the meter. And we definitely have customers who are doing that. There's the relative to baseline, right? That's your traditional demand response, right? That is saying that, I need 25 megawatts to shed, and having a baseline that, of how those customers would have been performing, should you have not controlled them, whether that's 10 of 10 or best of 5 or 3 out of 5, every utility, every wholesale market kind of has their own rules around what the customer baseline looks like. But being able to then, see in real time how you're performing versus that baseline for both like real time understanding of the system, but also when you go back and verify it from an MV perspective. We have what we call local triggering, right? And we're doing this now, in Australia, where you're looking at, being able to sit there at the cloud and send signals out to all these distributed energy resources. There is some latency involved, right? Granted, it might be, anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds, but it's latency, right? And that doesn't work when you're trying to solve for a problem such as, voltage droop, right? And so being able to send out or dispatch to certain distributed energy resources at a very local level, that should you sense voltage droop, these are the actions and controls that you will put in place, is an area that is now emerging in this space. It's kind of the new frontier a little bit as it relates to, especially voltage. But being able to arm these assets at a very local level to sense what's going on, and once they sense it, they already have a set of instructions as to what to do when they sense that potential droop in voltage, and responding accordingly, right? And then again, reporting back up to the cloud and back to the control center, or to the operator that, hey, this action has been taken on these assets at this point in your footprint, and here's one, right? Again, kind of along that same line. Again, you're looking at what would be traditionally the CDR world, right? That utilities have been using, different services and tools to manage and tackle over the course of the past few decades, and even line loss, which depending on the utility, that word can be taboo inside their four walls. So you have to kind of know ahead of time whether or not they get incentivized for line loss. So that is an area that depends on the utility. But again, distributed energy resources are there. The technology's there that allows the utility at a minimum to be able to see and control and again impact it from a use case perspective. And then we have groups that actually look at kind of taking these aggregation of assets and reshaping their load curve, if you will, based on a predictive analytic viewpoint of, say, like 4CP here in Texas, right? I think last time I'd heard something around the neighborhood of like $60,000 a megawatt for, $60,000 for every megawatt you're able to kind of avoid during a 4CP event. I'm sure that number's probably changed by a factor of a little bit one way or the other. And IESO, which is the wholesale market up in Ontario, as of last summer, I haven't looked at this summer, but for every megawatt that they're able to curtail during a coincidental peak event, it was worth about $150,000, right? So there's a lot of investment being made in that space of C&I customers investing in batteries that help, move their, shift their peak or, being able to go to battery backup, if you will, and kind of go off the system for a little bit to avoid that 1 hour period of time. So these are the primary use cases that we see. I'll highlight real quickly some of these. RWE is one where they have taken an aggregation of resources in Germany. I think I highlighted this at the beginning, where they're looking at participating in these new emerging markets in Germany, right? And so they're taking roughly about 150 megawatts of variable assets, right? They have some C&I loads, they have some generation, they're getting ready to add some residential loads to this, and all this is being piped into their trading desk, and their trading desk is just using it as energy arbitrage, right? And they're putting bids in, and if the bid gets hit, then they're curtailing resources accordingly. But for them, it's a revenue opportunity. That full stop, right? It's money for them, right? So that's kind of their use case, and that's exactly what they're using it for. They have for this is year 2 for them that they're participating in wholesale markets there through an aggregation of distributed energy resources, and they incentivize their customers. There's some form of split. I'm sure it's not 50-50, but there is a split between the revenue generated, what they keep and what they give to their end customer. Eversource is one where, as I mentioned before at the onset, right, their use case for them is cost avoidance, right? 55% of their, they make up 55% of the coincidental peak in ISO New England. And for, so it's big money for them if they can shed. Right now, they're actually well over 125 megawatts. They're closer to about 160 megawatts right now on the system. They're an interesting beast because they went out there and asked aggregators to participate. So what we're doing there is you have a group like Energy Hub that's aggregating thermostats. You have Voltus, NL, Direct, Reliant, and C Power all aggregating or bringing their own aggregation of C&I customers. And we're dispatching across every single one of them when we need to reshape the load based on a forecast of when the coincidental peak will take place. We're getting ready to add batteries to that, and by the end of this summer, they're actually going to now have visibility into all 3,500 EV charging stations that sit on their footprint. And I only bring that up because they only own a third of those. Only a third of the EVSEs out of that 3,500 are actually utility owned. The other 2/3 are third party owned, but because of the contractual relationship that they have made with those providers, they still get a chance to actually see those assets, but they just needed a mechanism or a platform by which to view them. All that information is going to be piped into system planning. so that they can better understand going forward where they need to build out more infrastructure for EVSEs. So if they see that in Cambridge, all their EVSEs are being overutilized pretty much, whereas in Braintree, not so much, you know, they hardly have anybody ever charging, then they're going to start putting their investments into the Cambridge area to build out more infrastructure for their EVSE portfolio. Portland General Electric is another one where they have taken, you know, kind of the simple use case of aggregating distributed energy resources, having some programs for both C&I customers and residential customers in the form of thermostats and hot water heaters, and calling daily events to reshape their curve. They're kind of chasing the rabbit as it relates to renewable generation at a bulk power system level. But currently, they're now taking they're taking all of these resources that are being connected and controlled and integrating them into the ADMS, right? So you have a DERMS platform, which we're managing for them, and now incorporating that into their ADMS so that for their operator, right, the guys in the control room, they have a single pane of glass in which to look at and be able to see what's going on in their system. And when they see an issue from a liability standpoint, they can then control those assets, you know, at a very localized level to ensure grid reliability, right? And at the end of the day, the customers are still being incentivized for giving Portland Gen the ability to connect and control to those resources. P&M is one where it's the simple DR program, right? Taking C&I customers and being able to load shape, call an event to make up, you know, EVs and batteries are now kind of that new frontier for them, because especially batteries and solar. I mean, if anyone's been to Albuquerque, you know, it's sunny almost like 85% of the year. And so a lot of solar panels going up around there, and they don't know how to manage that. That is an area that is keeping them up at night. And we're, you know, working with them on now being able to, you know, see those resources first and foremost, but then also then look at being able to control them should they need to. AGL I highlighted a little bit earlier. I'm going to briefly show you just kind of what we are doing there when you look at aggregating distributed energy resources to solve for a grid problem. I'm actually going to show you real quick kind of what that looks like on a typical day. You know, and I'll kind of skip through here real quick. You know, what you see up top in this top screen are batteries, 1,000 batteries on the system, right? There's 1,000 homes, each set up with solar plus storage, and every single home set up for solar self-consumption, right? So they first and foremost have to use what's produced by the solar panel, because there are limits there in Australia, at least in that particular footprint in South Australia, as to how much energy they are allowed to export back onto the system unless an event is called, right? So what you see is the blue is, is our batteries that are actually discharging onto the system. The green or the orangish color, the yellowish orange color are batteries that are actually charging at that given point in time. And there's 1,000 of them, like I said, that are sitting on the system. And, you know, throughout the course of the day, you know, we're monitoring these assets. Again, some are charging, some are discharging. And if you look down here at the bottom, you're seeing the aggregation of all 1,000 batteries, you know, on the system and what they're actually doing, okay? At a point in time on September the 11th at, you know, roughly 6 o'clock their time, there was an event where the market price hit $14,000 a megawatt hour. And so AGL asked, you know, or called an event to give them 1 megawatt of batteries or 1 megawatt of capacity that they could bid in and take advantage of that $14,000 megawatt hour opportunity, right? Again, it's an energy arbitrage opportunity for them, right? So what you're seeing is an aggregation of batteries that have all been asked at that point in time to begin to discharge, right? And down here you can see we're starting to make our way up to the 1 megawatt capacity that was being called upon. Yet we still have batteries, as you can see here, in the system that for whatever reason, they are actually still having to charge, right? Because there's something going on locally, and you have to take into account what's happening at the local level. More resources were needed. As you can see, we called upon more resources, more blue being exposed, but we also have some batteries that have hit their state of charge limit, right? Because again, everything had to be at 20%. So we're having to call upon more batteries to actually, discharge so that we can meet that 1 megawatt threshold that we had committed to. And then as we go back, into kind of a recovery mode, being able to now, see that, there's still some batteries that are discharging because of the limits imposed at that particular home. But now we're starting to see more batteries here that are starting to charge on the footprint as we move back to more of a stable state, right? And if you kind of look at it in real, kind of quick time, you can kind of see how, the assets are kind of, going from charge to discharge, a lot of them over the course of, this, 1 hour time frame in order to allow, what I guess they call it a gentailer. They own the generation, or they own generation, they own retail customers. They don't own the wires in between. So I guess that they call it a gentailer, right? So that's just an example of one of those use cases. In the last closing slide, I'll just highlight how distributed energy resources can be advantageous for actual end customers, right? US Foods here in Las Vegas is participating in a DR program there. They're using loads, right? Not fancy batteries and solar panels and such. They're just using loads. And they're using it for kind of two use cases. One is, to be able to actually minimize their exposure to their demand charge, right? So it's peak demand management, if you will, at a very local level. But then there's also the opportunity for them to actually participate in a DR program that NDE has, and they call roughly about 20 events per year, right? So again, it's a savings and opportunity for them. They're more than happy to participate, and and all of this is done, without a human in the loop, right? I mean, it's all automated. No one has to shut things off and go and turn things and turn a dial. And, here's, some examples of just kind of some of the things that are happening on a given day, through a DR event where we're asking assets to curtail within there, and what's happening even locally down here at the bottom of their freezer temperature, kind of keeping it within a threshold that the end customer sets at the onset when we get them stood up. Albuquerque Public School Systems, another example within P&M where, they're making roughly, anywhere between $50,000 and $60,000 a year over the past 2 years by participating, being able to actually dispatch multiple campuses through one single integration because of the way that their HVAC, BMS control systems are set up across 60 campuses. And right now we have 30 of them that we're talking to, and we're working on integrating the other 30 as they do some upgrades to those other 30 campuses. But again, this is an incentive opportunity for the school system, right? That money goes towards helping the school provide more programs and services for the students, right? So using DERs, being able to provide a program or service for them that they can then use that economic incentive to, facilitate other programs for their stakeholders. I'll end here with Dairy Road, and I'll end this with Electra, because Electra is one where they're a utility that covers most of the Golden Horseshoe around Toronto, right? Not downtown Toronto, because that's Toronto Hydro, but everything else around the Greater Toronto area, all the way around the lake up into Niagara Falls on the Canadian side. They cover, right? They're probably one of the largest utilities from a municipal standpoint outside of LADWP. And what they do is provide a program to they're now kind of commercializing this as a program for C&I customers to put EV charging stations at their places of work, right? Whether that's a Home Depot or an Amazon warehouse or a manufacturing facility, so that their employees or their customers can charge at any point in time. What they're trying to balance out is that with all these EVs coming on the system at a particular location, can they ensure that that customer doesn't see a higher energy bill or a higher demand charge because everybody's plugging into 10 EV charging stations at one point in time and their HVAC system's running all out? Can you balance out the entire building's energy footprint in order to maintain a lower cost of energy for that particular customer, right? That's kind of the incentive that they're providing to them. And so that's what we're doing there, right? And then, again, it's another use case for these distributed energy resources where you're connecting to them, you're controlling them, you're balancing them out locally, but also using them to participate in, like, the Ontario, hour ahead market that they have there. And doing that without impacting creature comfort or maybe potentially a warranty issue within, like, a battery, right? So there at Electra's facility, the battery, there's a solar carport, there's 6 EV charging stations, and 4 HVAC air handling units that are all being controlled in real time to balance out that building's output. And so if we don't have enough battery to help charge the cars at a given point in time, then we will, dial down the thermostat so it's not putting out as much AC. And if that's not the case, then we'll actually begin to curtail the rate of charge on those EVSEs so that, again, we're not bumping up against a new demand charge or ratchet demand, or, not paying a higher price because, say, the price of energy for that particular hour has, doubled or tripled, for that particular customer. So, again, very complex kind of setup, but it's one in which that, as a utility, they understand that, hey, I've got multiple assets within a building that I want to be able to control and provide that as a service to my customer that wants to be green or wants to provide, an incentive for customers to come there and the electrification that goes on in the space. And we're seeing more and more of that on the vehicle side. We want to be a vehicle to that, right? And so again, the kind of the takeaway is that the technology's there, the distributed energy resources are there. You just got to create the program and the incentive that allows you to harness that because it's doable, right? And that, I think, in kind of closing here, I think that's the key takeaway that I think Enbala tries to strive to talk with our utility partners about is that, don't let the fear of not having the technology available prohibit you from going out there and harnessing the value that these distributed energy resources provide. Because it's there and we can do it. So can others in this space. And it's just a matter of, looking at the cost benefit, looking at the programs and incentives that need to be created for these customers to participate. I'll leave you with a final thought, on kind of our vision of this space, right? And that is, moving again from participation in the wholesale markets, which is where distributed energy resources have really kind of been siloed for the better part of the last probably 5 to 10 years, to now really looking at this at a very localized level and incorporating those resources into the very fabric of your distribution system, right? So that you can see what's going on at the feeder level or the substation level, circuit level, and that you have programs in place or incentives in place that would allow you to connect and control those assets to ensure that, the lights stay on and that segment of the feeder is maintained and is stable and is balanced, and you're not having to sit there and hit on those cap banks and tap changers like my kids do at a Pez dispenser. So, the ability's there. It's just a matter now of working, towards like what incentives can be put in place that allow you as the utility to get that access and that ability. So that's what I have, and I'll stop there. I know we're coming right up at the top here. So see if anybody has any questions that I might try to answer for the team.
If anybody has a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
No question. That was just fascinating. That's amazing stuff.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I didn't know if I did a really good job or I put everybody to sleep. So
No, it just makes you think. I mean, it's out there. That's amazing.
It is, Don. It is out there. More and more conversations now are, like I said, even for utilities that are starting to get ready for procurement of resource, of a platform like ours. There's a lot of planning going on right now and discussion around like, what do we have programs in place that we can, use like legacy programs, or if not, we got to create some. And now we've got to go to regulatory to get them to sign off on this because this is a whole new game, right? So it's a lot of moving pieces. It really is.
Sorry, guys, my little microphone was hidden behind my vertical menu here on the computer.
No worries.
Well, that was very fascinating, JT, and I was kind of blown away with all the information that you were showing us and sharing with us. It's fascinating that we can have virtual power plants that react in such a dynamic way. When I entered my career at the utility, the phrase virtual power plant was in force, but it was mostly a sort of a static type of power plant where you were engaging in conservative measures that were pretty much operational the whole day, and was not dynamic to the minute or to the 5-minute period. And certainly we would not ever even consider going on the market. Of course, there was no market at that time.
Right. Well, and I think for us, what you even see some use cases, and I've heard this from the folks out, in a couple of the bigger IOUs in the Southeast, where they're looking at the ability to aggregate these resources as a way by which to run their gas plants more efficiently, which my mind's still trying to get my head around that a little bit.
Wow.
But they're thinking, well, if I need, if I'm running this gas, this combined cycle plant real efficient right now, but I've got more output than I need, I don't need to curtail that plant. I need to actually incentivize my customers to use more energy. So what assets do I have that can do that, whether it's water heaters or batteries or EVSCs? Usually that's, the main ones. But is there, can I incentivize them to actually use more energy right now, almost like one of those inverse block programs from the old days, right? And even PNM's a good example in that same space. The water authority in New Mexico, or in Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, probably makes up about 12 megawatts of capacity for their DR program. But they also sit at the end of, right in between, where at the end of that feeder, there's actually a solar generating plant that's utility owned that is certain parts of the day is producing way more energy than they need on that feeder. And so what they're asking, there's some negotiation going on between the water authority and the utility right now around, hey, when we do have those hour or 2 hours in the day where we're producing at max capacity at the end of the line, to prevent reverse power flow going all the way back, can we actually incentivize you, because they have a gravity system for their water system there, can we incentivize you to just run those pumps and fill those tanks and use as much energy as you can, and we'll give it to you on the cheap, if not free, just for helping us out so we don't cause an issue down, back upstream at the relay, right, or at the substation. So these are kind of these one-off use cases that you're seeing, but they're there, right? And we'll continue to see that, right?
Yes.
Well, and I guess I know Scott had to leave, but Linda, I will commit to taking the deck here, and I'll send it over to Scott, and he can distribute to those on the call or who weren't on the call today. And that way, and he's got my contact information. So for anybody both here or who weren't here that have some follow-up questions, I can't promise I'll have the answer, but I'll find it if I don't. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share some lessons learned or kind of what we're seeing out there in this space. Happy to mind share.
All right. Well, thank you very much, JT. And for the rest of the group, I just wanted to remind everybody about our next meeting, which will be on July 28th. And that will be engaging in PACE. So Dub Taylor will be making that presentation. And it says, and it is about how engineers play a crucial role in PACE projects. So Dub has been a member and a supporter of our local AEE chapter for several years, probably since the very beginning. And Dub is here at our meeting also. Dub, if you'd like to say a little, some words about your upcoming presentation, we'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
Sure. Can you hear me? I think I was muted.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so look forward to that next month. Many of you all are familiar with PACE to some extent. Some of you have been involved in different projects at different levels. Things have changed a little bit. We've kind of hit an inflection point where there's a whole lot of projects in the pipeline, and we need to really expand the network of not only contractors that can develop the scope and help owners with PACE projects, but also the third-party review engineers that are really critical to ensuring that these projects are sound technically and that they'll cash flow for the owners. So we're going to talk more about that next month, and I look forward to that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, so that's going to be Thursday, July 28th at 11:30. And by the way, that's going to be my 60th birthday. So looking forward to it. So anyway, thank you very much, Jonathan, JT Thompson, for your presentation and letting us know what Enbala is doing and how it helps us in our electricity market. And thank you. And with that, I think we'll give JT a hand. Thank you. And
y'all be safe out there. Y'all be safe, and if you're out at Canyon Lake this weekend, where I'm going to be, I'll make sure to wave if you see me. So from a distance.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next month. All righty.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Appreciate
you.